Hi.
Hi, it's good to talk to you. I'm glad we're meeting today. Um, and I thought maybe we could start by you could share a little bit with folks who'll be listening about your interest in this, right? This subject of suicide and facing it and being present and planning and purposeful. And then I can share a little bit and we can just kind of go from there. But
Sure.
would you
Sounds
tell
good.
us a little bit about you?
Yeah. So for anyone who I haven't met yet, or viewers, I run a nonprofit called Lively, which is focused on youth suicide prevention. So I'm a mental health therapist by trade. Jim attended a training of yours. That's how we met. And recently, over the last 2 years, have done work with this nonprofit. So have some lived experience, some personal experience being a suicide loss survivor before I was 18 years old. And so that definitely shaped me into a clinician.
Right.
And here we are. I mean, trying to make this happen, trying to reduce suicide overall.
Yeah. And I'm Jim Thomas. For people who haven't met me, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Been interested in human connection and the cost of isolation, real and perceived, of trauma, of shame, and pain avoidance and things, which naturally leads to you're going to deal with, we know some numbers maybe to normalize, right? And I'm a trainer. I train therapists all around the world and the country. And my current specialty is I do 2-day and 3-day intensives with couples and individuals and families, and love it. And very happy that it's working in the Zoom world. But I think that, when I think about it, maybe for us to normalize first for therapists that suicidal people, suicidal clients, trigger therapists. We have
Yes.
research and data and studies, right, to show that we get anxious, we can get judgmental, we assume things, we make blanket sort of generalizations, which I think you can speak to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the one thing that organized you and I talking was some research that I think maybe I could share and we can play off of this, is qualitative research, a study where they talk to people who've been actively suicidal, and often people who are going in and out of suicidal ideation and risk, and their experiences of therapists and different therapists, and how many said this very powerful thing, which I know you'll relate to, but I would start to tell my therapist about, my pain, about my overwhelm, and I'd say, I sometimes think about taking my own life, or I think I might kill myself. I don't know if I'll be here for my next session. And you know what happens, right? The therapist immediately goes into
Panic.
panic and risk assessment.
Yeah.
And this is what we're taught in grad school. This is what's super immediate knee-jerk reaction, protective reaction to say, oh, do you have a plan? Oh, do you? And what they said in the research was it felt like the risk assessment functioned, whether that was the intention of therapy. I'm not trying to shame anybody. I've been there myself. I've done that myself. They were distancing from the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
And do we do that with other problems? Maybe parallel to this is you hear about alleged child abuse, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Do you immediately go into risk assessment, or do you sit with the person that's talking about it?
Right.
How do we learn as therapists, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, how to stay with, and for today, with suicidal ideation and risk, and stay present and purposeful, and then plan, as
Right.
opposed to start with planning where we're maybe distancing now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think even in the trainings that we've been offering lately, I've been doing trainings on suicide assessment specifically for 4 years now, almost 5. And I always start the training by saying, let's know our edges. Let's know how we show up. Are we going to react in adrenaline? Are we going to react in panic? And then, figure out what's happening in our body, because we might say, oh, I'm cool with this, but my shoulders are now up to my ears, or some other tell of I am not comfortable, which clients can obviously pick up on. And why would that encourage them to speak? Mm-hmm. So, I think, Jim, you and I are on the same page of we've moved away from that cold clinical checklist. We're moving into a compassion story. And I just wish clinicians would start there too. And I know that we were all trained to just ask about plan, intent, means, and it really takes away connection.
Tell me about compassion story. I really like that phrase.
Well, I mean, I guess just the work I've been doing is I try to normalize from the get-go that suicide is something I'm willing to talk about. And
Hmm.
so when you think about meeting a client for the first time, can you even name that? Saying like, I'm not afraid of this. I'm talking to you about it now as we just get to know each other. And then the compassion story is like you mentioned, there's more heart. There's oh my gosh, I can understand how painful this must be. Because any of us who have sat with someone in suicidal crisis, we know it's more about pain than it is about death. And so sitting with it is absolutely mandatory, in my opinion.
But see, what you just said right there, I would have so welcomed hearing that in like graduate school or from one of my early supervisors. That's a powerful idea. That suicidal risk, ideation, feelings is more about pain than death, right? It's
Right.
about this getting away from managing, and then again, for us not to have like our sort of assumptions about what it means
Hmm.
and how it can mean so many things to so many different people.
Right.
I like what you're doing right away. You said you're calling us towards compassion. You're calling us towards um, what does this mean to this person and their felt
Hmm.
experience? And is this about pain or is this about emptiness? Maybe you could say there a little more.
Right.
Or is this about uh, I, a sense of total collapse? Like I remember one suicidal client years ago telling me, "You don't understand. You never had this, have you?" And I said, "What?" The
Hmm.
total collapse in your confidence that you can face another moment. I'll never
Wow.
forget that. The total collapse in my confidence. Like I don't think I've ever actually. I spent time in my sophomore year of college in a low-level dysthymia. You know, I was dysthymic. I was in an existential crisis, and I certainly would have endorsed if somebody said, "Do you sometimes kind of wish you had never been born?" Or if you didn't wake up tomorrow, would that be okay?
Right.
But I had some level of confidence that I could get myself up and go to class, even though I didn't know why I was in college. I had some confidence that I could get myself down to the dorm room and eat. So for us not to assume, like, I like to think of it like suicidal risk ideation and stuff is like an alert, pay attention, and then relax.
Right.
Alert, pay attention, relax, come towards, and that's why I like compassion story. Come towards. This is an opening into a person's experience. And that
Hmm.
qualitative study that I'm talking about, this is what when they talked about the therapists that they had the most powerful experiences were the ones where it's it's like there's an old quote I like from a song where he says, um, "It's like the time I ran away, turned around, and you were standing next to me." And they were kind of saying in a way like the therapists who were, I'm saying to them, I'm done, no matter what. And then I expect the therapist to have their clipboard out and be planning, and instead they're up emotionally closer to me. Tell
Right.
me about being done.
Hmm. Exactly. Like lean into the discomfort, name it. Therapists, I keep encouraging them to just like own your stuff because it's showing up anyway. So if you
Whether you
find,
like it or not.
yeah, if you find your like cheeks getting rosy or you have like, like any other anxiety reaction, own it, saying this is so important to me that I'm really trying to tune into this because this is something that scares a lot of people, but I'm here with you. Let's talk about it.
Oh,
I
I
want to
like that.
understand.
I told a supervisee recently that was dealing with it. I said, well, you know what you could say is, I'm a bit flooded right now because I am wondering about whether or not you need to go to the hospital, but I don't want our conversation to be about that quite yet.
Right.
I want to still talk to you about, and that leads to another bit of data, right? That we know there's a chunk of people in your practice that if you're working with depression, stress, you know, COVID,
Yeah.
there are people in our practices who may be wrestling with suicidal ideation and risk and stuff, and they're not telling us, and it's a lot higher percentage than we realize for the very reason that they don't want to have to go to the hospital.
Exactly. That's their biggest fear, right? Is if I utter this to you, if I share this with you, you're going to send me over there and it's going to be traumatic and it's going to be scary and it's against my free will, right? Like it's just a lot more of the entrapment kind of feel for people.
Yeah, and I think that's important for therapists. Like a lot of us, I think we might project that 3 or 5 days in the hospital or something, that's not so bad. And I always say to supervisees, think about it as you woke up in the middle of the night and you're in prison. Because emotionally, that's how it may feel to the person. I was asking for
Right.
help. Suddenly I'm in the emergency room, and now I'm in a lockdown unit. And I went from sharing with Jim, and that doesn't mean we don't help get people to the hospital that need that. That's
Right.
You and I aren't saying, let people.
No, I frame it as like, let this be the last resort. Let's have an engagement around their suicide story, figure out how they got to this deep, dark place. And then based on all the information we're collecting, can we make an informed choice if the hospital is the right option or not?
Oh, I really like the way you said that. And maybe I would add, like, can we enter into their suicide story? Can we enter into it? And then maybe that's the part where our capacities get challenged, because to go to that place, we run the risk. I think about the Brene Brown, so many people have seen. If you haven't seen it, there's a cute little Power of Empathy video to the TED Talk of Brene Brown. So if you Google the Power of Empathy, Brene Brown, you'll get this 3-minute video. It's the one with the bear and the fox and the gazelle. We want to stay up on the surface and say, existential fear, loneliness, so much pain, you want to end this, get away from it. Nah. You want to do a risk assessment? Versus the bear, right, coming down in and saying, it's dark down here and I can relate. Maybe you've never been suicidal yourself, but can you relate, you relate to your darkest night of the soul to say that this is a human experience people are having.
Absolutely. And, with that video that you're mentioning, the other part that is coming up is the part where they say, never start a sentence with at least, right? Yeah. So that's the gazelle coming down and being like, well, I'm suicidal and I'm sharing my story with you. And all of a sudden you say, well, at least you have your family. At least you have your dog. At least you have, right? So for any viewer who's a clinician on this video, please, please, please learn from my mistake in particular as a green clinician, when I thought giving them protective factors kept them alive, reminding them this could be a protective factor. That's not how this works, right? To say, like, at least you have your family, at least you have a job. Maybe that doesn't matter to them when it comes to this crisis.
I like it. And I was thinking about it too, that it does, like, if I'm working with somebody and they tell me this, I get anxious. It makes sense. The other thing, let's all be honest about, is clinicians start thinking about how could this impact me and my profession, and right. You have to kind of sort of come out of the closet about that and be able to talk to each other about it. And I don't mean talking about it on Facebook where you leave a record of, like, I get so scared about suicide ideation I avoid it. I'm not talking about it, but I'm talking to each other and saying what makes me anxious. I get anxious on one level because I'm usually emotionally attached to the people and person, and I don't want them to hurt themselves. Like, I know that suicide attempts, real attempts, are more likely to result in harm than death. I don't want them to kill themselves, and I also don't want them to create brain damage or, I'm going to try to step in front of a bus and all that, and I end up breaking my leg. And I mean, this is real harm people can cause. And I think there's a natural fear that I probably have of, even though I know over and over and over again, you hear talking about it doesn't, increase the chances of suicide. But I think there's a sort of common sense sort of part of me that thinks, oh, no, don't focus on it too much. Try to, like you did, get to those protective factors or change the subject or go somewhere else. And I actually have to sort of, like, find the bear in me in that video and tell the gazelle, why don't you think about what we're going to have for dinner tonight? Because I need to
go over there now.
This person. I need to be with this person.
Sit alongside. And I think, Jim, from your training, I think this will resonate too. I asked clinicians or therapists to think about what's in their room. So wherever this conversation's happening, if it's in an office, if it's through telehealth, back when we were all in our offices, I was very mindful about having physical things between me and my clients. So I'm not a fan of coffee tables, for example, which I know is hard for our clinician colleagues who do play therapy or have some sort of space where they need that. But when it comes to suicide specifically, I feel like that is just one more barrier that we can potentially try to control by saying, let's remove it. Let's have it out of the way so I can physically lean in, I can be present, and there's nothing in the way of connecting with you.
Another thing I think that we ought to be talking about, thinking about more, is the person's relational world when they are in such pain, and how engaged and brave do we want to be in activating the organic, people in their lives. Because I learned over the years, that often when somebody's in that dark place, and I say, well, can we connect you with this person or that person or that person, will often say, no, I've burdened them too much. It won't matter. Doesn't make a difference. And I've had a couple experiences with some very high risk people, and I don't want to say too much for their privacy, but where I literally, I hear you don't want to go to the hospital. You're telling me, I'm going to follow through. I'm going to do this. So, you can force me to go, whatever. Will you call blank and tell them goodbye? We get on the phone and say, and then getting off the phone and hearing like, oh crap, they talked about how much they'll miss me, and that they're getting on a plane. They're going to fly from Chicago. And it's hard in the face of that. It's like a whole new set of information, because so often we're dealing with pain and isolation that's perceived and not always real. When we're that depressed or that existentially challenged or lost that much confidence, that sometimes we need our therapist to kind of come in and access resources, and we do it with depression. So can we do that with suicide, right?
Right. Can we remain curious and help them find those things without putting that agenda on them, right? As you named earlier, I think, the remaining curious is a really big part of this, to just be like, help me understand. Why do you feel isolated? What makes you say that you would be a burden on them? Just really trying to figure that out. Because something I think that's really reassuring for people to hear is, if they're having this conversation with you, they want something to change, right? They are the group of people we can actually support, versus the group of people who feel calm or euphoric about their decision to die by suicide, and we see no warning signs, because it's not distressing for them, it's comforting.
Yeah, I had to remember this. It's the image. People have an image that's akin to, like, we think of drowning from the movies, that most people that are drowning are flailing and screaming for help. But the vast majority, and sad if this triggers anybody that's lost someone through drowning, lifeguards they're actually looking for sudden stillness often.
Yep.
Because that's what's usually happening, and that's the higher risk person, right? It's the calmer person sometimes. So,
and it scares us as clinicians, right? It makes us say, how can I help you if I don't even know what's happening? Right. And then our community members, our families are saying, I couldn't see it coming. And it's because maybe they are the outlier. They're the exception, where they feel calm or euphoric because they've made this decision, versus the person in your office saying, I'm in pain. Obviously, there's a part of them that wants to talk about it, or they wouldn't utter a word to us.
Right. So you got some really concrete stuff here that I think is so helpful. I like your compassion story, Lean. This is a compassion story, and you're a part of it if you stay engaged. And that engagement is a protective factor. It's a lower risk. But we also have to recognize, like, we're not responsible for whether a person's suicides or not. It's that thing of do your best, and know that people do kill themselves. So we want to do our best, stay engaged. And then you said, like, join in, engage in their suicide story. Like, how did they get to this place? And now you're adding the curiosity, which is good advice for therapists in general, right? I think about that. I just be curious. I really like it. And I wonder if, part of what I told supervisees is, if you've ever watched Mr. Rogers, just do that. If you're in a panic, what do you think a person like that would say? Right. So if you say to me, will you role play with me for a moment?
Sure, I'll try.
Jim, I think I'm really done. It's probably our last meeting. You could fill in the blank, right?
Jim, I've hit my limit. I can't do this anymore. I don't feel like there's any hope. This pandemic could take forever, and I don't know if I'm going to survive it. I don't think I'm going to be here next week.
And then I say, and I will use my best Mr. Rogers voice out of respect, not making fun of him, but I could see Fred saying, Khara, that's quite powerful that you're telling me this. You're letting me in on a story of where you've lost hope, it sounds like. You're overwhelmed and you just don't think you can do it. That's what and you've given me the chance to just be there for you as you make this decision. And already, even in a role play, what would be happening to you, right?
I'd be softening because you're not freaking out, right? Like, if anything, you're just going, wow, I'm reflecting back what I just heard you say. So then I feel heard and seen. And I'm like, okay, you're not going to slap me in the hospital. You actually want to know what's going on with me.
Yeah, like you're really talking about, I think, a core deep curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Can I be curious about how a person would get to this place?
Right.
And then be curious about their talking to me about it as a therapist. How come? Without being tricky.
Right.
It's not yeah. Do you have any other thoughts about this as we just, if somebody's watching and thinking about being present and purposeful and engaged and curious is what I'm hearing that I resonate with.
Something I noticed you did that actually I love teaching both clients and supervisees is you went like this. And this is like accessing the heart, right? Like there's something vulnerable about putting our hand on our belly and our heart. We teach people breathing exercises, but when someone really wants to connect with their emotion, I have them do this. And so is that a technique for clinicians? Like when they're acknowledging like this, I'm overwhelmed, I'm flooded, but I'm here. Can that show up as more genuine because they've activated this heart, right?
I like that. Anything to activate your heart.
Yeah.
I do think too, if you're facing someone like this, high risk, you're getting flooded and stuff, is we can attachment prime ourselves too. Like you can borrow from, if you resonated with us, you could see us maybe in the office with you saying, oh, it looks very scary and overwhelmed. I would be scared and overwhelmed too. Maybe we could touch our heart. Maybe we could channel some figure that, like a Mr. Rogers or somebody peaceful in your life that you wish you could, find that part of you, like an internal family system, find like your deeper self or something, rather than a panicky protector or
exactly.
or realize maybe you're I always think about, if we go now to risk management, you do want to assess risk and you teach that. And I think it's important to remind people of risk factors. We should do that maybe before we close. But I always remember doing this safety planning thing at Denver Children's Home. And it was actually designed by attorneys. And they said, that they really simplified it. Gather information, assess the risk now and in the short term.
Right.
Co-create a plan, share the plan, gather more information. And I always like to remind us that if they're in our office, the risk in the moment is super low. Now the risk when they walk out the door. Now I know Zoom adds a different layer to it.
Right.
But if they're on our Zoom call, the risk in the moment is lower. And that helps to relax me. I did crisis call work at Denver Children's Home, and I get these calls like 2 a.m, and I want to kill myself. And hang on a sec, before you do that, I'm going to make tea. My old boss Sharon said, always make tea if you get a high risk call after midnight. And then I'm okay, my tea's ready. So tell me again, you're going to kill yourself. Can you tell me more about that? That while they're on the phone, their risk is low.
Right. They're engaged.
Just doesn't mean it's not possible. If they're on a Zoom call, if they're in your office. What else would you, so if we're being curious, we didn't jump into risk assessment, we're entering the story, we're engaged and curious, and we either need to do our due diligence for, or they're just opening up to, no, really, I'm like done.
Yeah.
What are the key steps in like risk assessment and planning that you would want to remind clinicians about?
The acronym that we used is one you've already named, which is ALERT, right? It's how we feel. It's the adrenaline. And so the acronym itself stands for A for ask, So what are we asking about for suicide? L for listen, which of course is that leaning in engagement. E is for engage around both the stressors that put them to this place where it's possible, but also the protective factors. And then respond is what level of risk are they? What do we need to do for them?
Right.
And then tasks will be documenting it. So I know that originally when you and I connected about this topic, it was also to say, like, what's within our power as clinicians to do around safety planning, because someone had asked about verbal contracts and we're both like, no, don't do a verbal contract. They don't work. They just say that to you to make you feel better. And so I just want to come back to safety planning briefly here at the end to say, like, this is an empowerment tool. This is how do we help them function to the best of their ability between sessions or between interventions or whatever's happening, to say, like, do you have a plan? Can you at least try this for me? Because again, if they're talking to you about suicide, there's a little sliver of hope in there somewhere that they want something to shift. So are you helping them identify that with the safety plan?
Mm-hmm. I think it also calls to me, and in those stories, you know, the couple times I've had people call people and things, the more, you know, a lot of us in the field is kind of a weird field where we're in this very heartfelt engagement with people, but we're supposed to have all these boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I'll sometimes have, you know, like somebody I mentored or something call me and say, well, I had this suicidal client, and, you know, and I woke up this morning just thinking about them, and a part of me wants to just call them and say I was thinking about them, but I know I'm supposed, you know, that might be like over involvement. And I don't know, you tell me, I think you're more learned in this area than me, but my advice generally is, if your heart says to call them, why don't you just call them and tell them you were thinking about them this morning.
Yeah, I think that is powerful, right? That's huge because, you know, even when you come back into a session, I had a client today and I was like, oh, I was thinking of you over the weekend because of 9/11, which was significant to this person. And I said, and I almost called you, but boundaries. And she was like, I would have been happy for you to call me. Like, she was like, no, you should have called me. But we've had enough rapport that she knows I'm not going to blur that boundary for no reason. And I don't think you would either. And so go with your gut. You know, if something's going on or you're like, I just want to outreach them, we know from different studies that this actually makes them feel cared for. And so it actually has a very powerful, positive result.
Maybe the combination of, if I think about the theme of this, is it's normal to be afraid to care.
Mm-hmm.
When you're dealing with high-risk clients that might take their own life. And
Absolutely.
how can we find it in ourselves to care and not be afraid to care? Like, and that's kind of like a dialectical tension or something that we need to wrestle with, because when I have that much pain, I need to know there's a human sitting next to me. That, like the time I ran away and turned around and my therapist was standing emotionally close to me, and maybe help point me to other people that are closer to me than I imagine, including my relationship with myself or the higher power, whatever that is, those resilience, protective factors. But being willing to be in the muck and do some discovery about what is it like to be in that much pain.
Mm-hmm.
That it's
Not to be afraid of it. It's a human experience.
Yeah, that would be how I close it. I think that's, when I think about Fred Rogers, I've been studying him more and more, you know, and he talks about anything that if you can talk about it, it becomes manageable. And if I think about humanistic psychology, I think it's that recognition that suicidal ideation, the risk of suicide, that people think about taking their own lives, is, sad to say, a part of the human experience. And the more therapists can embrace that it's part of the human experience, then maybe it becomes easier for people to talk to us about it. It also means you might attract more clients who can talk about it, and the risk that somebody might kill themselves, you know, and maybe that could be a whole nother topic, is if anybody's listening and you've had a client suicide, that's a particularly difficult thing for therapists, and you have to get support and you have to talk to people about it and not be alone in that. There's
Absolutely.
so much, it can be so much guilt and things that come with, did I miss something? Did I not see it? Like you said, the more calm, silent.
Right. Yeah, I think to your point, Jim, I would like to see the conversations between clinicians and their clients about suicide come as easily as sexuality, which I think of like puberty and, oh God, we don't talk about this. And now we talk about it a little bit more freely, depending on who we're talking about. The same with any other uncomfortable topic, where it just took some time for us to be like, I can get comfortable with this. I can become more comfortable. And if I can't, that's okay too, because I know that everyone has their limits. But, you know, can people get to a place where this was just like talking about puberty? It was uncomfortable. Now it's a natural thing to talk about.
I think that's a great way to close. That, and maybe to put into that larger conversation of the more things that we can become comfortable talking about ourselves, whether it's differences between us and clients in terms of gender, orientation, and skin color, and ethnicity, and belief systems, whether it's high risk activities, you know, like somebody's using drugs, can we make it safe for them to talk about something that we may be worried about but they see as just part of their life? Right. And can we talk about things like suicide, where that's a frightening subject for most everybody? And thank you. I'm gonna hit stop recording here in just a sec, say goodbye to you, but this is wonderful. I hope people get to see it and learn from you. You have a lot of wisdom and knowledge in this area.
Thank you, Jim, for the conversation.
Thank you. If you want to reach you, how would somebody find you?
Well, probably through Cata Lively. So it's spelled CATALIVELY.org. So that's our nonprofit that's specifically focused on doing these kinds of trainings, having these conversations with clinicians, recognizing we're all needing some extra. So I would love to have people join us in the training and feel more confident.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. You can find me at jimthomas.care, jimthomas.care. And thank you all for listening.